Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about a news story from the Sydney Morning Herald. And of course, this is another story out of Australia involving the Big Four and pay cuts. Now, as we previously stated on this podcast, Australia is the most interesting country on the planet right now because of their coronavirus response, and as far as this podcast goes, because of all the news that comes out about the Big Four accounting firms. And I think there are a lot of people in Australia that listen to this podcast, or at least that's what I want to believe. But it appears, and the reason I say that is because of their response to KPMG's pay cuts and layoffs. It appears that KPMG employees are finally standing up and asking questions. And that's what I was encouraging people to do on this podcast when all this stuff was happening. But now they're rising up, according to the Sydney Morning Herald at least, and they want to know how their firm did so well but still laid employees off and cut their pay. You might remember that we covered KPMG's revenues in Australia on this podcast. Now, KPMG reported revenue increase of 7% during these tumultuous times, and the article quotes that. And when we covered that number on this podcast, we had a lot of questions about that result. How could they possibly have such good results when they had to cut pay by 20% and they laid people off? KPMG has said that they will reimburse some of the pay cut, but it's going to be a very limited amount. But the staff want the full pay cut reimbursed. Now, Deloitte has already resumed regular pay, but KPMG hasn't. And Deloitte was going to resume 100% pay in October, but they already moved that up to September. And KPMG is going to be doing that next. Now, the Sydney Morning Herald cites a spokesperson for KPMG, and they have the following quote: "We were pleased we are in a position to repay some of the salary reduction and get our people back to 100% salaries, despite the outlook still being highly challenging and uncertain. While it was too early to make a decision on additional remuneration payback, if circumstances permit, and payback will be prioritized to our people in full first." I mean, that quote is pretty confusing, but it seems like they're going to get people back to 100% salaries, and they're not really sure what to do as far as paying people back for pay cuts. But you still have to remember that KPMG fired people in Australia. And why did they take all of these measures in a year where they almost achieved 10% growth rate? Something doesn't add up here. And that's why I told people when KPMG first did those pay cuts, the 20%, not to opt into it because it was voluntary. You have to fight back against this stuff because it only gets worse. And now KPMG is getting caught in lies and they're not going to do the payback. They're waiting on it. And they're just hoping people don't notice, get too busy. But everybody in Australia and KPMG should keep fighting back. Keep bringing this up. Don't let it go. And if they don't give you the money back and they do pay cuts and fire more people, then just leave the firm. You don't have to work for these firms. It's your life. You only have one life. But the thing that I think is a problem here is KPMG's, what I'm going to say are lies. I don't think KPMG had a 7% growth rate. I think those numbers are made up. Even if they had a good year, there's no way they hit 7%. Why would they cut people's pay and lay people off? Unless they're just downright liars, it wouldn't make sense to do that. But I think this proves something here. And I know people get mad at me sometimes in the YouTube comments because I'm biased against KPMG. But what this shows is how dishonest a firm KPMG is. And if you're an employee working for the Big Four accounting firms, or a potential employee, which a lot of people on here are, like KPMG out of the Big Four accounting firms, not all the Big Four accounting firms are great, right? We know that. But KPMG has to be at the bottom of your list. If they're the only Big Four that gives you an offer, fine. But You just have to realize that they do stuff like this. And it's not just in Australia. It's all over the globe. KPMG is like this. They're just dishonest and confusing. And even the quote from the spokesperson doesn't really make that much sense. So it's not clear what's going to happen going forward. And it doesn't matter if you work for KPMG or one of the other big four accounting firms. Don't give in to these pay cuts. And if that means you have to get a job somewhere else or figure something else out, then do that, because you don't want to work for less pay and then end up getting fired, or just work for less pay for a firm that's dishonest like this. So that's just my 2 cents. I think it's very interesting. This is a great news story that people are rising up and asking for the money, especially when they come out and say they have a 7% growth rate. Because the big four accounting firms are just ridiculous. Why would they release that? The reason they made their growth rate 7% is because they wanted to show clients and partners and everybody how well they're doing, so that there's confidence in the firm. But what they don't realize is their employees pay attention to that as well. And they're just hoping the employees didn't care. But they're so confident and they're so used to employees not questioning anything that they went ahead and published that. But now they've gotten themselves into a pickle, and we'll see what happens from here. But that's today's update. To get future updates about the big four accounting firms and pay cuts and layoffs, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Support us through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes to this podcast. And if you can't do that, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment on our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.